Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. This is actually part one of a two-part video where I explore the permanent shift in jobs, the permanent shift in unemployment in America. In fact, the most significant change in the American economy in the modern era. Welcome to this episode of Ignition Time, everyone. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda, and welcome to our channel. If you're not a subscriber, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Please smash that like button, and welcome to our channel. Now, I want to give some sense of perspective to our viewers and subscribers. A year ago, the unemployment rate was 6.7%. 10 million fewer people were employed than before the pandemic. A lot of economists thought that it would take years for the market to heal, for the labor market to come back to normal. Then there were two big surprises. Number one, there was a huge demand for workers unlike ever before. And also, despite companies wanting to hire, millions of workers decided that they would either retire early or stay on the sidelines. Now, this created what the Washington Post calls the most unusual job market in living memory and an economy afflicted not by too few jobs, but by too few workers. Let's show you this image on your screen from the Washington Post. The demand for workers has recovered, but the number of willing workers has not recovered. Think about this for a second. The number of people willing to work, and you'll see that at the upper part of this image, has actually reduced since the start of the pandemic. And the total number of job openings, which of course declined substantially when the pandemic hit us, has now come back to what it was pre-pandemic, but the number of people willing to work has reduced. In fact, the number of people who have or want a job has stagnated since May 2020. On the other hand, the demand for workers has actually returned to pre-pandemic levels. So, for those looking to get a job or to switch jobs, the 2021 economy has actually been a blessing because many companies are hiring. Now, I know it's not as easy as that because many of our viewers and subscribers have said they've applied for many jobs but have still not gotten a job. I get that. But overall, companies are hiring and many workers are now feeling that they have many opportunities. But the problem is that many industries like restaurants, for example, cannot find servers, and there are factories that cannot find people for the assembly line, and even hospitals cannot find nurses. So what's happening is that there are acute shortages in specific industries like healthcare, like entertainment, like hospitality, and these are raising some very challenging questions about how certain sectors in the American economy can essentially function. I'm specifically talking about leisure and hospitality. I'm talking about bars. I'm talking about restaurants, because these sectors traditionally have relied on workers being paid close to minimum wage. So now these industries have to pay more in order to hire workers, in order to attract workers. And these shortages are causing some major problems. Something has to change in 2022, or this could lead to a long-term defect in the American economy. So the big question is, how did the labor market actually get here? Folks, when the pandemic hit us, the impact was just unimaginable. In April 2020 alone, nearly 21 million jobs were lost. And despite improvements throughout the year, many economists thought that progress would be very slow as businesses would hire reluctantly. But the fact is, the recovery has been very rapid. In fact, according to Daniel Zhao, who's a senior economist at the employment website Glassdoor, he said this: 2021 was a surprise, I think, to all economists. At the beginning of the year, we were concerned about whether we would get a strong economic recovery to get anywhere close to the labor market before the pandemic. And he says, in some ways, we've passed that. But folks, the desire to hire from these companies, that's not the entire picture. The problem is that the number of Americans who are working or looking for work, and that's essentially the labor force, has reduced substantially. Remember, there were heavy layoffs in 2020, and as a direct result of those layoffs, or in addition to those layoffs, a vast number of Americans actually left the labor force. In other words, they said, hey, I don't want to work anymore. Normally, when the economy bounces back, a lot of these people start looking for jobs. But this time, that has not happened. Since the summer of 2020, the labor force participation rate, in other words, the share of the American population looking for jobs or currently employed, has hardly budged. Here's another image on your screen. The 2020 recession features one of the fastest and slowest recoveries of any recession since World War II. Now, let's take a look at this for a second. One of the fastest for the unemployment rate. Check out the unemployment rate, which went well above 10% as a direct result of the pandemic, and and now it's come back to where it was pre-pandemic. And take a look at those gray areas which represent other recessions since World War II. On the other hand, this is the slowest recovery for the labor force participation rate. Think about that for a second. As far as the labor force participation rate is concerned, after the 2020 recession, things did start to recover. But take a look at other recessions where things recovered. In other words, people got back to work. But as a result of this recession, guess what? People have not gotten back to work. In total, there are still about 3.5 million fewer people employed than there were 2 years ago. And government statistics show that just over half that number of people, 1.8 million people, have joined the ranks of Americans looking for a job. In short, a lot of individuals have decided they don't want to get back into the labor workforce. Now, I believe that there are two reasons this is happening. One is the number of elderly Americans to retire early that have dropped out of the workforce has increased substantially. Why? Elderly Americans have decided to retire early. They've decided to spend time with their family, presumably their children and their grandchildren. They've just decided they're going to take it easy. They don't want to do a dead-end job in a supermarket or in an office where they don't like what they do, where they experience ageism, where they experience sexism, where they experience racism, where they are not treated as human beings. No one wants to experience that. And I think that's been a new reality post-pandemic because people really have had a chance to think. The other reason I believe is the younger population, the millennials, who've decided, hey, wait a minute, why should I continue working 10 hours, 12 hours a day? Why should I put in 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks when I'm not climbing up the corporate ladder, when I'm not happy with what I do? For me, flexibility is more important than money. For me, being able to work from home is more important. For me, having a schedule where I control my own hours is more important. And these are the factors that have resulted in millennials quitting in large numbers. And this is the start of the permanent shift in the US economy. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with these comments in the description section below. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Dr. Nitin Chhoda. This right here is a little bit of information about me. You'll learn more about who I am, what my journey has been like, and why you should listen to me. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.